Every faction in wrestling has a hierarchy. It doesn't matter if we're talking about groups from the past like the New World Order and D-Generation X, or groups from the modern day like the Bloodline. The reality is that for every top dog in these stables, there has to be a bottom of the barrel too. But just who is the worst member of every faction in WWE today? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at right now, starting with the newest group on the block, Paul Heyman's as of yet unnamed stable, and their weakest member, Bronson Reed. Yes, whether you're calling them the Dangerous Alliance 2.0 or something else entirely, one thing which is for certain about this new collective on Raw is that there is a lot of star power amongst their ranks. After all, aside from the wise man in the spot of mentor and manager, there's also multiple-time former world champion Seth Rollins taking up the leadership role. Then of course there's the position of mostly silent heavy, who's clearly the future project, something Braun Breaker is taking care of. So this means Bronson Reed, the fourth member of the group, has been left in a somewhat awkward position ever since joining up with his new teammates a few weeks ago. Sure, Bronson is a good enough wrestler in his own right, but the reality of the situation is that when stacked up next to the trio of Rollins, Heyman, and Breaker, he's the Jannetty of the foursome. So there's no way not to consider him the worst member of the faction then. That is, until another new member potentially joins who's lower down on the pecking order. Until this happens, however, the Australian's role will remain constant, with him probably being the designated pin eater going forward, always there to put a babyface over and save Seth or Braun from having to eat the direct loss themselves. But what of the other big stable on Raw these days, the Judgment Day? Well, when it comes to their worst member, that could only be JD McDonough. After all, the other people who are currently a part of this group include the likes of Finn Balor, Dominic Mysterio, and Liv Morgan, three pretty prominent people on the Red brand these days. Hell, even Raquel Rodriguez has a more important role on Monday nights than JD McDonough does in 2025, as she's currently one half of the Women's Tag Team Champions. No, while he has a role on the show himself, the Irishman's position is very much to be the lesser member of a team. And that's something we can't see changing anytime soon. Maybe at one point you could have said Carlito was a step lower down on the pecking order than he was, but ever since Carlito was released, he's been quietly excised from the team. And with Roxanne Perez not being an official member of the group yet, she can't really be included in the discussion. But at least having this spot will continue to keep McDonough in a job for the foreseeable future. And the same statement could be applied to the worst member of the next stable we're about to look at, the Bloodline. That's right, it's time for us to talk about Tonga Loa. Yes, the Bloodline as it stands today is not the same one which existed a few years back. No, this one, led as it is by Solo Sikoa, is a shell of the powerhouse group that was run by Roman Reigns back during the early 2020s. And that's meant there's not much star power left in the group these days. No, even Solo himself has not as of yet managed to live up to the expectations first put on his shoulders when he initially took over leadership back in the spring of 2024. Still though, even if this is the case, we can't consider Sikoa to be the weakest member of Bloodline 2.0. And we can't even say that about Tama Tonga either. Why is this? Well, because Tonga Loa has become notorious for being a bit of a botch machine. But then this is nothing new for the Honolulu native, as back in his days as part of the New Japan roster he was in a similar situation, so it should come as no surprise that he's continued in this manner ever since joining WWE last year. But let's move away from the Bloodline and instead over to the worst member of the Wyatt Sicks, the one, the only Eric Rowan. Now, the Wyatt Sicks certainly had a notable introduction to WWE TV back in the summer of 2024 when they set about destroying the gorilla position backstage on an episode of Raw. But since then, while some had hoped they'd go on to become a main event force, it's hard to argue they've settled into any more than a mid-card role. That said, this has allowed them to get some more TV time recently, giving each member a chance to re-establish themselves to audiences once more following an extended absence. How have each of the members set about re-establishing themselves? Well, by trying their best to stand out during the group's segments. Sadly though, not all of the Wyatt Sicks have been very successful at this. No, while Bo Dallas has continued to enforce his leadership role, Nikki Cross has looked suitably spooky as Abby the Witch, and Joe Gacy and Dexter Lumis appear to be going after the tag belts. Eric Rowan feels like the most lost member of the faction today. Why has Eric Rowan fallen into this role? It's hard to say, but with his character not being the strongest, it's meant he's gotten lost in the shuffle somewhat. Could this change for him? It certainly could, but as it stands right now, he seems to be the lowest in the pecking order in the group. But at least Eric Rowan isn't alone in being in such a position. No, there are plenty more stables in WWE who have members filling the same role, and right now, one of them can be found in NXT, a group who goes by the name of Dark State and can list their weakest member as Osiris Griffin. Of course, when it comes to Dark State though, we have to add the caveat that most of the members of this group are still pretty inexperienced. In fact, out of the 4 members, only Saquon Sugars has done anything outside of the WWE system, with him being notable for at one point winning the Deadlock Pro Wrestling World title. Aside from that, however, we're talking about 3 rookies in Dion Lennox, Cutler James, and Osiris Griffin. And while all of them still have a long way to go, we'd argue that as things stand today, the one with the furthest to travel is the latter. Could he overtake his teammates at some point down the line and end up becoming the best member of Dark State? Sure, it's still so early in the careers of all of them, like we said, so anything could happen as time goes on. But with him not having a singles win to his name yet, Osiris Griffin can't be spoken about in such a way in 2025. Yes, if Dark State ever wants to make the main roster, then the Illinois native will have to continue to improve in NXT. That said, this is something which can only happen with experience, something he's getting more of each and every week. And Osiris isn't the only member of the NXT roster who's trying to build up his experience levels at the moment so that they can escape the role of worst member of their factions. No, we could apply the same statement to our next subject, the Culling's own Nico Vance. That's right, if you haven't been keeping up with NXT as of late, then you may not be familiar with the Culling, one of the newest stables on the brand. It all started not long after Shawn Spears returned to the company in February of 2024 following a run with All Elite Wrestling. Obviously then, one of the things Spears had learned during his time down in Jacksonville was that being a part of a stable was a very easy way to get ahead in the business. So that was why at the first opportunity he'd form one of his own down on NXT when he gathered names like Brooks Jensen, Izzy Dame, and Nico Vance around him. What kind of success, if any, would the Culling have following their formation? Well, while they wouldn't be in the world title scene or anything, they would turn into a strong mid-card act, one good enough to help their leader become North American champion for a while. As for the other members, however, they've yet to claim any gold of their own. And of the rookies being mentored by the chairman, we expect it'll probably take Nico Vance the longest to achieve this goal. But then, like with Osiris Griffin, a lot of that can be put down to the fact he's still so inexperienced, with him only getting started as a wrestler in 2023. Yes, even Izzy Dame and the recently removed from the group Brooks Jensen look like old hands compared to this Arizona native, and that means his current status as a bottom-of-the-barrel member of the Culling can only be expected. Yes, for now, Nico Vance can continue to mostly remain on the sidelines and learn from Shawn Spears. Who knows? Maybe this will eventually lead to him forming a stable of his own one day, and if he does that, this stable may even be able to head over to Raw to do battle with another notable faction in modern-day WWE, one named the Latino World Order, whose weakest member right now has to be Cruz del Toro. That's right, we know there have been various different incarnations of the LWO over the years, with the earliest coming from WCW back in the day when Eddie Guerrero was taking the reins. But as Eddie passed away several years ago now, it means the modern incarnation has little to do with him anymore. No, the version we find on the WWE main roster in 2025 is a babyface group led by Rey Mysterio, one which also includes prominent Latino performers such as Joaquin Wilde, Lince Dorado, Dragon Lee, and of course, Cruz del Toro amongst their ranks. So how did we decide upon a worst member of this fivesome? Well, one thing is for sure, it certainly wasn't going to be Rey Mysterio. No, as one of the greatest to ever do it, he was ruled out of contention right away. And it wasn't going to be Dragon Lee or Lince Dorado either, because they are two of the better luchadors to enter WWE in recent years. Obviously then, this leaves only 2. And while we do like Cruz del Toro in the role he fills, we can't deny he's a step below Joaquin Wilde. That's right, someone has to come last, and in this case, that last place can be none other than the man formerly known as Raul Mendoza. Sure, he's a good performer, with this being something he's proven in the past in places like AAA and Pro Wrestling Noah. But if we're being honest, that level of success is something he's never been able to match in WWE. And given how far down he is on the pecking order already, we honestly don't see that position changing anytime soon, as someone has to draw the short straw and be the pin eater of the stable. But let's move away from the Latino World Order for now and over to the other Latino stable of current-day WWE TV, the heel one found over on SmackDown named Legado del Fantasma. Who is the worst member of that group? Well, that would have to be Berto. Sure, he's not a bad wrestler by any means, given the fact that, as of the time of this video's recording, he's a AAA World Tag Team Champion alongside his cousin Angel. But again, as with so many of the other stables we've looked at today already, someone has to come last. And with there being only 3 members of Legado del Fantasma, Berto, Angel, and the group's leader Santos Escobar, there aren't a lot of people to choose from here. Yes, we suppose we could choose Escobar, but that wouldn't feel right because as the captain of the group, he's been steering the ship ever since they broke away from the other members of the Latino World Order a few years ago. And as a one-time former Cruiserweight champion down on NXT, he is the only one of the trio to have held any singles gold in WWE. Really then, for that reason alone, it can't be him who fills this role. And while we could have picked Angel, there's a feeling that he's just a step or two ahead of his cousin for the most part when it comes to their work in the ring. So that only leaves Berto to draw the short straw here and be considered the worst member of Legado del Fantasma. But let's move back over to NXT and look at their resident female faction, Fatal Influence, and their worst member right now, Jasmine Nix. Now, fully female factions in wrestling are still a relatively rare thing, at least when compared to men anyway. Historically, we're talking about groups like the Beautiful People from TNA. But there are a few in the current day too, one of the prominent of which would be Fatal Influence. Who is Fatal Influence? Well, they're a trio of women made up of none other than Jacy Jayne, Fallon Henley, and Jasmine Nix. Obviously then, when looking at the weakest member of this team, it's hard to argue that Jacy Jayne wouldn't be the right choice, as she's the current NXT Women's Champion, with that being an honor she earned after she beat Stephanie Vaquer for the gold on May 27th, 2025. And when it comes to Fallon Henley, well, she's a one-time Women's North American Champion. As for Jasmine Nix, however, she's yet to achieve any accolades like this herself. Sure, she is still incredibly young, only 26 in fact, so that could all change with time, but as things stand right now, she's a step or two behind her stablemates. What should be her first steps when it comes to turning things around? Probably going after the Women's North American Championship that Fallon Henley once held, either that or teaming up with Henley to go after some tag team gold. If she can do this, then she might not be a Jannetty for much longer. No, by the time the members of Fatal Influence are being called up to the main roster, we could be talking about the New York native in a very different way as someone who's broken out of the mold she's currently in. And she's not the only woman on the current day NXT roster who's looking to break out of the mold, as moving over to the No Quarter Catch crew for a moment, we'll find our next subject, Ren Sinclair. Of course, when it comes to the No Quarter Catch crew, they're not a women's only group. No, they include members from both sexes. In fact, over the course of their existence, they've featured the likes of Drew Gulak, Damon Kemp, Miles Bourne, Charlie Dempsey, Tavion Heights, and Ren Sinclair. That said, as things stand today, the former 3 of those have split from the faction, and that's left only Dempsey, Heights, and Sinclair remaining. So why are we picking the Dallas native as the weakest member here? Well, like with others we've looked at today, it's a case of someone having to be the one to draw the short straw. That's right, Ren Sinclair is far from bad, she just hasn't progressed as much as her teammates have as of the time of this video's recording. Now, when it comes to Charlie Dempsey, he's been riding high on the developmental brand as a 2-time NXT Heritage Cup holder, something you'd expect from the son of William Regal. And conversely, when it comes to Tavion Heights, while he hasn't won any titles himself yet, he's been using his amateur wrestling skills to good effect as of late by appearing in the N1 in the summer of 2024, Pro Wrestling Noah's version of the G1 Climax. As for the former Maddie Renkowski, well, she's still very much trying to make a name for herself, something she'll no doubt do as more time goes on. For now, though, she remains the rookie of the quasi-shooter faction. Maybe what she needs in order to get that boost then is to do what Tavion Heights did by going over to Japan, maybe by appearing in a round-robin tournament of her own, like Marigold's annual Dreamstar Grand Prix. For now, though, she'll just have to keep doing her thing on Tuesday nights, gradually getting better every time she steps into the ring, and taking all the knowledge she can from people like William Regal and Shawn Michaels. If she does this, then she'll be great for the future, and that might one day lead to her heading up to the main roster, potentially with the rest of the NQCC, to feud with another stable in Alpha Academy, a stable whose worst member for our money has to be Akira Tozawa. Yes, Akira Tozawa is a very good wrestler, he's just in the wrong role in many ways. Come on now, if he was doing his thing in the ring in a more serious role, he'd likely be tearing it up on a regular basis. But unfortunately, this is not the case, and as things stand today, he's become little more than a job guy on the Raw roster. Sure, he does get regular TV time as part of Alpha Academy alongside his stablemates Otis and Maxine Dupree, but his role in this group is very much that of a comedy jobber, mostly used in backstage skits. And whenever he does hit the ring, he's generally the guy taking the pin by the time all is said and done, as Otis is a couple of steps above him in the pecking order and a lot more protected as a result. That's right, while he's not a main eventer himself, the big man is someone Triple H seems to see a lot more in than the Hyogo native, so usually he gets better treatment overall. And when it comes to Maxine Dupree, well, she's not exactly a main eventer or anything herself. She has carved out a nice role on the women's roster in recent years, with her rookie stylings endearing her towards a large part of the audience. All of this is to say that for as long as both Otis and Maxine remain in the position they're in, Akira Tozawa is always going to be in the unfortunate position of being the worst member of the group, even if he is the best in-ring performer of the three. Will things ever turn around for the Japanese star? Sure, it's possible he catches fire for some reason in the future. Or it's possible he even returns to Japan at some point down the line, maybe while still working for WWE as part of a talent exchange of sorts with Pro Wrestling Noah. And if that happens, he'd be able to get the best of both worlds by being allowed to show what he can do with the handcuffs off, all while remaining a member of Alpha Academy. One person who we don't imagine will be heading over to the land of the rising sun anytime soon would be our next subject, the worst member of American Made, Brutus Creed. Yes, given we've just talked about American Alpha, it only makes sense to talk about the heel groups which branched off from them next, the one which is led by the former tag team partner of Otis, Chad Gable. That said, while Chad is very clearly the leader of American Made, he's not the only person in this group. So aside from him, there's also Julius Creed, his brother Brutus Creed, and the lone female of the stable, Ivy Nile. Needless to say then, this foursome have had quite an impact on Raw in recent months, with them at points running rampant over the Reds brand's mid-card. But who is the weakest member of this group? Well, it's obviously not Chad Gable, as he's on arguably the biggest role of his career right now, and we'd be hesitant to say it's Ivy Nile either, so that only leaves us with the Creed brothers then. And out of the two, Julius Creed is seemingly the future singles star. And this means, by default, Brutus has to be considered the worst member of American Made as things stand today. Sure, like with everyone else we've looked at today, this could always change in time, but as of this summer of 2025, the situation is what it is for the Lexington native. Of course, even if this remains the case, however, it's not like anyone will be considering Brutus Creed a failure, as he's still good, just not as good as the other people he affiliates himself with. But what about the other current-day WWE stable we've yet to look at, the one which is featured down in NXT, the D'Angelo family? Who would get the unfortunate status of being the worst member of this group? Well, that could only be our next subject. Who are we talking about this time? Who else but Luca Crucifino? Now, if you've been a fan of NXT over the past few years, then you'll be well aware of the D'Angelo family, as they've pretty much been a mainstay there ever since its inception during the early 2020s. That said, the main focus of this group has always been their leader and namesake, Tony D'Angelo. Or at least this was the case up until very recently, as it was on April 19th of this year that Channing Stacks Lorenzo broke out of the pack by turning on Tony and attempting to establish himself as the new boss of bosses on the developmental brand. And when we look at the other members of this group, first being Rizzo, she's been able to look good in her matches in the women's division down in Florida, as well as shine with her great character work. When it comes to Luca Crucifino, however, he often seems to get lost in the shuffle. What will it take for him to pull himself out of this state and start standing out? Time at the very least. After all, if he gets enough of this, there's every chance he could rise up. Maybe Luca Crucifino needs to break away from the group himself, just like Channing Stacks Lorenzo did before him. In the process, establishing himself as his own man, someone who doesn't need to be led by anyone going forward. Whatever happens, we hope Luca falls on his feet eventually, just as we hope everyone else we've looked at today does too, because if one thing is for sure, it's that no one wants to be remembered as the worst member of the faction they're a part of.